2, 1. Hey there, Fellowship family. Welcome to your one-stop shop for all things church life. My name is Mark Francis, and I'm once again your host for today. And with me, I have a nice young couple, Jake and Marsha Richards. How are you?
Hello.
Doing well, and you?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you so much for coming and being part of the show today.
Sure.
It's really exciting. I'm excited to get to know you guys, which I already do, but just get to know you guys even more. But in the context of where we're going as a church over these next several weeks, you're going to be hearing a lot about congregational engagement. And what does that really mean? What does that look like? And I was encouraged by listening to the interviews and testimonies and stories of those who we chatted with these last several weeks for promoting the 40th anniversary for FBC, and hearing how God worked in their lives years ago to really help plant the church, but then really to be the church. And hearing how they were just hands-on, boots on the ground, inviting people to lunch, cleaning toilets, dealing with children's ministry, all the different things that would go on with the church was, to me, exciting. And I'd really love to see how can we boost that same kind of energy in now this large church mentality that we have, even amidst COVID. So congregational engagement over these next several weeks is going to be a focus. And you guys were the first and foremost on my minds because of how you guys have really instantly gotten plugged in since you started coming to FBC. Mm-hmm. And I want to go even before that. So let's hear your story. Before you even came to FBC, there was life with the Richards family.
Yes, a lot of life.
Yeah. And I saw you were wearing a hat when you first walked in. It said Reagan on it.
Yes.
So I just got to ask, what's the significance of that?
Well, my daughter bought that for me when she and her husband visited the Reagan Library, which is in California. And I've always thought Mr. Reagan was a wonderful president, did a great job for the country. And so I just honor him by wearing the hat. I get lots of comments on it when I'm walking around town. They're usually of the "we need him back" kind of category.
Yeah.
So.
I figured I'd ask because, tell me a little bit about your history of kind of where you guys grew up, what you did for a career, both of you guys. And I'll start with you, Jake, but then you can pass the torch to the lovely lady next to you.
I will do that. I was born here in Virginia, and I went to the University of Virginia where I met her brother. He and I went to college together, and so the way we met was that I took him home from school one summer. We'd both been down there for some reason, and he invited me to come into his house, and I came in, and there was this beautiful young lady in there. It turned out to be his sister, and we dated for a couple of years, and then we got married. We've been married now. It'll be 54 years in about 2 weeks.
That's
so
awesome. In just 2 weeks?
Yeah.
In 2 weeks.
All right. Congratulations.
Thank
nice
you.
Fall wedding. Yeah.
Yes, it was.
It was a rainy day, kind of like
Rainy
today.
day. And so I was in the Navy. I was a bombardier navigator in A6 intruders for 20 years, and then retired from the Navy. Went to work for a variety of companies around Washington, D.C. I'd come back to Washington for my last Navy tour, and ended up working for IBM in the information systems management business, mostly helping companies with management, and then retired from there and then moved out to the Valley. That's my story.
That's a good story. Very clear and succinct. Yep. So how do you add to that story?
How do I add?
Yeah.
Well, I grew up as an Army brat, and we lived mostly in Virginia, mostly in Northern Virginia while my dad was in the Army, and then when he retired. So all of my schooling basically was in Virginia. We had a couple of overseas postings as well. And then when Jake and I got married, we were immediately in the Navy. And so I went from an Army upbringing to a Navy wife role, and which one prepared me very well for the other. And we traveled around, and that actually had a lot to do with setting me up for my career, which was a home-based business, Tea for All Reasons, which I ran for 19 years, and just retired at the end of last year.
Wow.
And passed that on to our daughter, our eldest daughter. We have 2 daughters.
Okay.
We're grown with 2 children each, married with 2 children. And think that's
So how many grandkids do you guys
we have four.
4. Okay. Are they local? Where do they live?
2 live over in Nokesville near Manassas, and 2 down in South Carolina.
Okay. Do you get a chance to see them somewhat
The
regularly?
ones in Nokesville we see fairly often.
Especially now that she's in the tea business. And,
Yeah, COVID has kind of interrupted us going down to South
Yeah.
Carolina.
yeah.
Sure.
So,
But they range in age from 11 to 17.
17.
Yeah.
Neat. Well, just help put me in this perspective. How does God fit into this story? Kind of, how did you guys come to know Him in your life, and how does that fit with your marriage? I'm just kind of interesting to hear how that works out.
Yeah. Well, as the fact that we got married so young, and we were very young and very inexperienced and kind of thrust into a new world of the Navy, we had a lot of issues. And actually, I came to know the Lord through a Billy Graham telecast.
Wow.
When we lived on the West Coast. And then very shortly after, Jake came to know the Lord because of the difference that he saw in me. And then, it was like, it was a whole new world, whole new marriage, whole new family life. We had our both of our girls by then. And we have had really a wonderful life because it's kind of a play on words because of It's a Wonderful Life, but it really has been a wonderful life. I mean, we've certainly had our ups and downs. We've had job losses and
Financial
difficulties through the years and what have you.
But the rock has always been, God's always been
firm, yeah. And so we. One of the things that I would say for us is that our faith never wavered through those years, and we continued to serve. And we really started serving the Lord pretty early on and got into leading and teaching and mentoring and every way. And then, as we're going to talk about, community groups, we got involved in those and in leadership with those as well.
And even before you guys came here to fellowship, what year did you guys start attending?
10 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Even before you guys came to fellowship, you were heavily involved in the church. Was it Fairfax?
We were at Fairfax Community Church, which was near our home there, and they're very invested in community groups to the point where almost no other ministry takes place other than community groups. All the other ministries flow out of community groups rather than having a lot of ministries and then also community groups. So they have a participation rate, easy for me to say, of about 90% of the congregation are in small groups. And they sort of expect you to join a small group as you come into the church. And before that, we had been in an even smaller church of about 200 that we were one of the founding members for. And that church was also founded with the principle that you were expected to be in a small group. In fact, when we first formed the church, we told new people coming to it that there were 2 things that we expected. One was that you show up on Sunday morning for the worship time, and the second was you show up for group. And so that church grew very quickly to about 200, where it has stayed because frankly, in Fairfax, it's difficult to find. It's at that difficult stage where you don't get in enough money from 200 people to be able to build a building in Fairfax.
It's hard to get property.
But they have stayed faithful to the commitment to small groups. So we felt it's important for the last 30 years.
Yeah, I mean, so you're speaking of how you see the value, you see the benefit of being a part of a group. Is there a certain story or an instance where you had a group really minister to you and your family?
Well, it's hard to point to one thing. I mean, certainly they were there when I lost my mother and when I lost my father. And so those were 2 instances there that it meant a lot having that support group there. But I think Jake has got a great example of really had a great impact on us to understand how valuable community group is to all ages.
Yeah, we were in a group, and I was leading a group, and it spanned a lot of generations. And at the time, we were in our 50s, and there was a couple in the group who were in their 70s. And on this particular night, they were celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary,
Cool.
which was really cool.
Yeah.
In that group, we had a lady who just that week had been served divorce papers by her husband, who had run away with the secretary.
Wow.
And then we had several other couples in various marital states, and so the night, even though it's one of those things where I had planned a lesson, God had a different idea.
Sure.
And so what we ended up talking about for the entire time was about marriage, the goods, the bads. How do you survive it? What are the struggles? What are the strains that come across in a marriage? How do you get to being married 50 years? And we had a young fellow named Aaron. Aaron was in his early 20s, and this is how young Aaron was. He had just graduated from college. He and 6 guys were living in one of the Fairfax regional parks. He was a regional park ranger, and they put him up in a cabin. So there's 6 guys living in a cabin with outdoor plumbing in Fairfax. So I mean,
So he loved coming to our house.
He loved coming to our house, but you can only rough it for so long when when you're in your 20s, you can do that. So Aaron sat there the whole night and didn't say a word. And after the meeting ended, I went up to him and said, Aaron, I'm really sorry. This wasn't the planned lesson.
Right.
And I said, I'm sure you were bored to tears over hearing all these folks talking about all the struggles with marriage. And he said, no. He said, it was very useful. I intend to propose to my girlfriend this weekend.
Oh.
And now I know exactly what I'm asking her to get involved with.
Wow, because he saw all the dirt.
It was across the board.
It was
everything
across the board.
that he could, not everything, but he just got a really good sampling of what can happen in a marriage, the good, the bad, and it really had a great impact.
And it actually caused me to shiver a little bit because I could see God at work. God turned that whole night into that discussion, not because of any of us. He wanted Aaron to hear, so that Aaron knew what he was asking his girlfriend.
And all in the context of a biblical model, I'm sure.
All in the context of a biblical model.
To hear and see what God's plan is for that, not that it's all roses and daisies and perfume, but that there's difficulties in life.
Yeah.
And ultimately, that's what a small group like that is meant to be a part of. To be able to challenge each other, to walk alongside of people in the group, to hear their stories and to encourage them.
You're sharing life together. And, the Bible throughout the New Testament, I was looking a few days ago, the word one another occurs 153 times in the New Testament. And both Jesus and the authors of all the epistles were saying, love one another, pray for one another, honor one another. They were saying that we needed to do life together. The Christian life wasn't intended to be lived alone. It was intended to be lived with others. And in a large church like we have, it's hard to get to know people well enough to really do that one anothering that we're called to do. And so that's why smaller groups are so critical. Yeah. Because that's where you really get to be one another.
And even in this season of life right now with COVID, I mean, here we are, we're finally getting used to it. It's been since March. We're looking at coming up in 6 months, essentially, where there's this somewhat isolation, and I was even talking to my wife today, and she went to go visit a good friend over in Northern Virginia, and how her friend really hasn't gone anywhere. Yeah. And her friend's not a believer. The purpose was to say happy birthday and stuff like that. But to say, man, you're so isolated and you're there with just your kids and you're struggling and you're trying just to get through life and you're barely going to the grocery store. You're barely getting gas. You're just home. Life is not meant to be in isolation like that. Right. And so how can we overcome this day and age of the difficulties of knowing that, okay, we are called to, be safe. We're called to, not contaminate others around us. And this is a season of a pandemic. We want to be safe and cautious about that. But how can we still engage with others around us, and especially as a believer, to encourage each other and to glean stories from each other of how God is working in your life? Yeah. So how do we do that in this world today?
Yeah.
Well, our group, our community group, is meeting in person now. We do practice social distancing. We're blessed with a place where we can spread out.
Yeah.
But it's just good to get together in the flesh and see one another. The various telecommunications methods, Zoom, for example, they work up to a point, but it's hard to really establish connection with a little face,
Right.
a head in a box, basically.
Right.
It's much better if you can get together in person, because God intended us to interact on a personal level and to see one another. He made us sensitive to our faces. He made us sensitive to body language. And so we need those cues so that we know what's going on in our lives together.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm in the business world also, and there's the concept of communication. And you can look at, oh, this is worth a text. I'll just text this person this information. Then there's a level of email, right?
Right.
And then there's a level of a phone call. And then this day and age, there's a level of Zoom. But then there's certain things that you just know, I've got to meet with this person in
Exactly.
person, face to face, to have this conversation.
Exactly.
And so in any scope of life, face to face is best. And in our context here of the biblical model to encourage each other, to equip each other, to love one another, encourage all the one another's, encourage, serve, pray for one another. Admonish one another. I mean, there's so many different things that you can get into with the one another's in person. It can't be beat.
It cannot.
That's right.
So there is going to be this encouragement and this push. And I have you guys here for this conversation because, Jake, walk me through when you guys moved into town and you found Fellowship Bible Church. You have this heart for groups. You have this church that you came from in Fairfax that had a heart for groups, and you brought this passion to FBC. So kind of just share with us what your role here is and how you are desiring for FBC to grow in our heart for community groups.
Well, I am the administrator for community groups for the church, and how I ended up in this role was that when we first came to the church, we actually were in a community group probably the same week we first came to the church. We had the real estate agent who helped us find the house that we have was an attender here and invited us to come to the church. And then Marsha had met Donna Duffy and knew Donna Duffy from a tea transaction that she had gotten involved in back in Fairfax. And Donna and Dave walked around. They live in our neighborhood. They walked around to see her, to welcome her to the neighborhood because they were excited about her coming.
Yeah.
And they invited us not only to come to the church, but to come to their community group, which was just down the street from us. It was the group led by Ken Spence. And so we were engaged in a community group before we were members here because we knew it was important to get plugged into a small group. We knew it was important to be engaged with other people. And so right from the beginning, we were in the group. And then I ended up being in the where I am because Don Den Hartog had come to me and asked me to participate in the leadership team that he was putting together, and I did. And then Jeff Rose was the chairman of the team, the leader of the team. And then when Jeff decided to step aside from that role, Don asked me if I would pick up being the chairman of the leadership team. And then over time, it sort of morphed into, well, you just be the administrator for community groups for the church. And so that's what I do now.
Well, I got to say, I really appreciate it because in this model of in day and age where the church is meant to kind of do the work of the ministries, or that's the work of the pastors, and that's what they're getting paid for. Here you guys are, and Don, in his wisdom, to say, I'm working with biblical education, I'm also working with community groups. That's just more than I can handle and bear. And here you are, willing and able, and it's just so vital to the church to be able to organize these groups in this way. And I'll be honest with you, I mean, you're not getting paid for it, I don't think.
No, they keep threatening to double my salary.
So, I mean, but that in and of itself is just a great attitude and heart to have. Say, I'm just willing to give my time, help serve the church as I have these gifts and talents to be able to do it. And that's a model for the rest of us to say, how can I really get plugged in? And your heart is for community groups.
Absolutely. And I would really like to see the community group grow in the church. We currently have, I would estimate, maybe a third of the people that are in our congregation are actually currently in a group. I'd like to see that grow to be closer to that 80 to 90% involvement, because I think if you just come on Sunday and sit in the back and listen listen to, even if you sit up front and listen to the sermon, you don't get that one another. There's no way you can get that same encouragement, that same sense of support that you get when you're in a smaller group. And so the vision that I have is that eventually we increase the number of people involved in community groups and help it to grow as a ministry, and that it becomes part of our DNA. That when we greet a new member or we greet a new visitor to the church, we ask, what's your name? Hey, welcome to the church. How long? Where do you live? How are you in a group? Yeah. And just that becomes our natural instinct is to ask, are you in a group? And if you're not, come to my group or come to our group, and just get people engaged in these smaller things. In the first century, there were no large churches. And when Paul wrote the letter to Romans, chapter 16, he says, greet, and there are over 25 names. It may, there's some discussion there. But the thinking is that they were the leaders of the small churches in Rome. There was no big Roman church. Right. There was these collection of house churches. And so in the 21st century, the church has become this big building that has 1,500, 2,000 people going through on a weekend. You can't know those, but you can know a dozen. You can know 6 really, really well.
And we have no idea what God has in store for the United States of America.
Exactly.
I mean, in the world today, the home churches is the only place of where it's at.
That's right.
And there could be a time where that's the only way of doing it. And Marsha, I know you wanted to speak to something about that too.
I was reminded of something that Mark said on Sunday about the fact that it's not all about what we're going to get out of it. Why is it worth my time to invest in a community group? It's what you're contributing in the lives of other people, that you've got your particular gifting and your passions and your talents and your maybe you have the gift of mercy or service. It's what you're going to be able to give to that group. It's not really all about us. It's what we give in return.
And even attending church is the same way. The mentality to come to a location and a time and a place to worship and to get something out of church, you're missing the boat if you're thinking that you're just there for yourself.
Right.
And how we contribute to the body is in many different forms. And God's given us gifts and talents to utilize that, and there's a blessing to others and there's a blessing to ourselves spiritually when that happens.
Yeah.
There is. I had a pastor say one time that when you do some work for the church, if it's not your gifting, it runs your battery down. But if you're doing something for the church and it is your gifting, that charges your battery up. Yeah. And so it's not necessarily coming and sitting on Sunday is where you get your battery charged. You get your battery charged when you go into a service, or you go into, if you have visitation, you go visit people in a hospital. If you have helps, you help people. If you have giving, when you give, it's when you exercise your gifts that God has given you, that's when you get charged up. Yeah. And other people look at it and say, well, I could never do that because I don't have that gifting. And that's right. God gave you maybe a different gift, and so maybe that's not what. But He wants us all to be in small groups, because it's in the small groups where we really get to apply those gifts. It's where we're supposed to help one another, pray for one another, encourage one another, bless one another. All those things take place in a small group setting.
Yeah, definitely. And so from your vantage point of being kind of the director, the administrator of the community groups, you said there's a certain percentage of people that are part of one. But we're going to be launching here in the next several weeks kind of some opportunities for more people to get plugged in. There's some new groups happening. There's openings in groups. What's the sense of the variety of groups that we have available, and how can people listening really truly get plugged in?
Well, and the variety of groups is interesting because we've got groups that have all kinds of interests. We're going to have a new men's group starting up that is intended just for men. It's going to be during the workday. So it's not a nighttime activity. It's going to be trying to find a time. And the leader's flexible about what time. So we're really excited about that one. We have another group that we've identified that is for widows, that's just specifically there to support them. At one point, we had a group that was for divorced ladies, but that's been moved over to the divorce care. And that's fine because they're still meeting as in small context over there. We have lots of couples groups. We have a group that is designed, for example, for young parents that they bring all their kids to this one place. It's in Berryville. They come to Berryville and they share a meal together every time they meet. Then they do their study. The kids have a ministry session that's led by the children of the leaders. It's a wonderful way for young parents to be able to attend a study, meet with other young parents, share what it's like to be a young parent in a Christian environment, and maybe even get a little break from the kids for an hour or two. We had to. We understand the break you need from the kids every once in a while. We have seniors groups. We have groups that are for empty nesters. We have all kinds of groups. Our current group ranges everywhere from, we're probably the oldest in our 70s, but I think we go all the way down to about
50-something.
Well, maybe 40 even with one
right.
lady.
You're right. Mm-hmm.
So we're cross-generational, and I'd like to encourage more cross-generational. That experience of Aaron in that one night of discussion is the real reason that I believe cross-generational groups are really key. The tendency is that those of us who have gray hair or no hair tend to want to lecture, and that's not what this is all about. This is just sharing life together. Yeah. And I really need to know more about what the younger generations are facing that maybe I know the technology is a lot different, and I know the things which they face so how can I pray for them better? The way I know that is I get in a group that are struggling with the things.
So if you're a young adult listening, don't shy away from a group that has somebody with gray hair in it.
Exactly.
Right?
Or no hair.
As a matter of fact,
or no hair.
We had a young couple in our group for, I think we realized it was probably close to 3 years.
Close to 3 years.
And they were in their late 20s, then early 30s. And they came with no children. They had 2 children while they were with us. And what was wonderful about having them was it was a way for us who were grandparents and missing our grandkids, we could love on their kids. But it worked the other way around, too. They felt so comfortable in our group because they were surrounded by all these grandparents that were, it just showered love and support on them and took care of a lot of their needs and what have you. So it was a wonderful experience having them. Yep. They've moved on. They're a little bit older now, and So that's another important factor. And I know this is an issue that's really close to Jake's heart, is how a community group doesn't have to necessarily stay in its present composition for years and years. Yeah. And ours is definitely, we started our group, I would say, probably 8 years ago, maybe 9 years ago. And it has changed over the years as one group or one couple has come in and been ministered to, and then they felt they were in a good place and God was calling them to something else, and they moved on. This young couple, different place in life, different stage, they moved on, but others came in. And we like to say that our group is always open as long as we have room. Yeah. Our group is always open, but we never throw anybody out, of course. If they want to stay for like 9 years, they may, but we don't have that as the model at all. We have a model of people coming in and out as they feel led.
That's a great point, because there is definitely a benefit of being in a group for years and years and years and seeing your children raised together and grandchildren and really understanding the heart of every single person there. But there's also something to the point of to divide and conquer, to be able to break apart. And our church needs more leaders, right? Yes. So we need people who have been through a group for a couple different years and see the benefits, see the model. Absolutely. And then prepare and deploy, right? Is a
Exactly.
part of our mission statement at church.
Exactly. And, leadership can be a scary thing, but it really isn't. Because when you're sitting in a room full of folks and everybody's afraid you have to be the Bible answer man, well, what are you about this? Tell me why God planted the tree that they couldn't eat in the garden. What was he thinking? Hey, the answer is, I don't know, but I'll find out. And that's a perfectly good answer, because there's plenty of resources in the church where you can come back to and say, hey, I got this question last time we met. What's the answer? And you can talk to all the pastors and get it. Now, I will tell you why God planted the tree there, though. He gave us free will. And so the tree was there so that we could exercise, so that Adam and Eve could exercise their free will and not eat it. But they did. They failed. We're all failing. We all have free will.
It's all part of God's plan. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't surprised.
He wasn't surprised. That's the thing. He wasn't surprised. He put the tree there. He knew it was going to happen.
Yeah.
But the point is that really, as a leader, I'm looking for men and women, if they want to lead a women's group. I'm looking for men who are just willing to devote their time to love on their group. You really only have to stay, as I used to say in college, the professors only had to be one lesson ahead of the students. And that's really what you need to do, is just be willing to sit down, study the lesson in advance, get the answers that you have clarified in your mind, and then go into the evening to facilitate a discussion about the Lord's will. And then love on the group. Our group spends 2 hours together every week. We spend 30 minutes at least in socializing, just chatting about, we'll have a snack, we'll chat about what's going on with everybody's life and how it's going. Then we'll have about an hour-long Bible study of some topic. This year we're studying Hebrews. And then we have 30 minutes of prayer. And then we part. We start at 7, we try to finish by 9 faithfully. And that's kind of the model for most groups. The third thing is that I would want to say about groups is that my vision of groups is that there is a Bible study time, there is a socialized time where you have friends and catch up on all those things. But then there's a call to service. God didn't call us to just be a holy huddle studying the Bible. He called us to go and be those deployed disciples. He's go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in my name. So that challenge that Christ himself laid down for us is fulfilled through the groups. And so we challenge the groups to not just meet and study the Bible and get to know one another, but then to serve as a group, because there's a real bonding moment when you serve as a group.
It's a great tie-in, because as we're having these conversations over these next several weeks, there's this hand-in-hand integration of being a part of a community group and then using your gifts. And you can use your gift within the group context, but within the overall church, our church needs are immense.
Yes.
And so there's going to be ways for you to find out where those needs are on the website. In the same way, there's going to be ways for you to find out how to plug into a group on the website. So I'm looking at it right now, and maybe Jake, just walk me through what this page looks like, because it's fbcva.life/community. Right. And that is probably the best way to find out what is out there.
Yeah, if you go to fbcva.life/community, there's a form there that you can fill in, and what we're looking for is just some contact information so we know who you are. And then there's a couple of options you can do. If you're feeling led by God to lead a group, tick that box. That email, the system will then send that information to me, and I'll get in touch with you about what's next steps as far as being a leader. If you're interested in finding a group, if you tick that box, a menu will open up which will list all the current openings that we have, all the groups that are currently have space for members. And literally by space, I mean how much room in their house. About the only reason that groups are closed to new members is because the houses are just too small. We do have one group that has 21 children that come, so I think that's the limit.
21 children?
21 children.
Wow, they're bold.
And so that group has said, please, no more children. They're happy to take couples, but they're about children out, as it were. However, then if you see one there that you're interested in, you highlight that one, send that information off to us, and then the leader of that group will get in touch with you to invite you to where it is and share more about it. And if it's a good fit, you're ready to go. There's also an option there to say none of these fit me, and if you say I didn't find one here that matches, then that comes to me, and what I do is I take all the ones that we get there and I try to see if I can shuffle them to see if I can make a group out of the people who didn't find a group. We know that geography is important, although in COVID it's not so important because there are people that are willing to meet online. My concern about online meetings is that I think they're a wonderful way to keep a group going. I'm not sure it's a good way to get a group started because you need that one-on-one, face-to-face time. But we'll see. It's new times. We'll see how it goes. But if you're interested in either leading a group or being a group member, go to the fbcva.life/community, fill out the form, and we'll get back in touch with you.
Yeah, it's great.
Something else I would say about that is that someone who wants to lead a group doesn't necessarily have to host. It can be hosted at another home.
Yeah,
if
good.
someone in the group has a larger home and they're willing to open up their home for that. I think that sometimes is a stumbling block for some folks. They would like to lead, but they don't really have a place that they feel comfortable inviting people in. And so that's not a prerequisite.
And the other way around, if you are willing to host, but maybe don't feel God calling you to lead, let us know.
Yes.
We can get a group, organized to meet in your home.
Bottom line is, if you feel God tugging at your heart to get connected, you should probably do something about that.
Follow what God says.
Don't find the excuses of I'm not equipped or I don't have the place or the space. But
sometimes we wait for someone to come and ask us.
And that was something that I thought of just a few minutes ago when we were talking about just kind of being in the worship times and corporate gatherings and handpicking, just saying, hey, how are you? Are you new here? And are you part of a group? And that conversation, that doesn't have to be the welcome team. It doesn't have to be the greeters. It can be anybody that you're sitting next to. Just engage in that conversation. Find out who those people are. Are they connected? And find ways to engage people in that kind of conversation.
And I think that despite the social distancing that we're experiencing now in the services, we might have to be a little more proactive. I know it's difficult, and we've experienced it where, the rows are being dismissed and what have you, but we may have to be a little proactive when we get to the outside or whatever. If we see someone we don't recognize,
that's a great point.
To reach out to them.
So basically, in these times, it's good to sit in the back because you get dismissed first.
Don't say that now.
You can stand out in front of the portico. No, think about it. You can you can stand out in the porticos and greet people as they come out.
No, the back door or the back row Baptist. We've got.
Oh yeah, I know.
We've got that mentality too. But no, you can worship God in any part of the room that you show up in, and that's fine. Or even online, or downstairs in Fellowship 3, the people call the basement.
Or
it's fine too.
Night.
Or Saturday night.
Yeah.
But just bringing this home, Jake, just give us one quick kind of summary. Just remind us once again, we really covered it, but why, if somebody's listening, why should they be a part of a community group?
Because God says you should. I can't say it any clearer than that. God wants us to live with one another, and one another is not just two people in a home together. It's the people that surround you that are in your fellowship with you. It's God's model that we challenge one another, pray for one another, encourage one another, love one another, exhort one another, admonish one another. All those verbs only get done in a small group setting. They don't get done in a large group setting.
In relationship.
And not forsake meeting together. That's the number one. Hebrews 10 in chapter 10 it says, "And let us not give up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but let us encourage one another to love and good deeds, even more as you see the day approaching."
We see the day approaching.
That's the verse for this time.
Yeah. No, that's great. I really appreciate you guys being here, hearing your stories, hearing your heart, and once again, thank you for your service, because without that, obviously God sovereignly brings people and puts them in places here at the church to be able to serve and use their gifts, and you guys are doing that.
Well,
So
it's our pleasure.
Everyone listening, we just thank you for being a part of the podcast as well. Keep in mind, you can contribute, you can add your thoughts going to our website. fbcva.life/podcast is a great way. Checking us out on YouTube and all the other podcast channels. There's going to be more interviews to come over these next couple weeks talking about kind of congregational engagement and how can we serve and how can we be served in part of community groups. So thank you guys once again. And
Pleasure.
as we leave this time, just keep in mind, once again, let Christ be the focus of your life each and every day.
Amen.